All Elite Wrestling has already changed professional wrestling forever in a number of ways, most of which are good, providing fans with greater choice, competitors with another way to make a living, and most important of all, giving us the gift of Danhausen on a global platform. But in 2023, with the shadow of AEW's darkest hour still looming, Tony Khan's ambition is about to completely transform his Elite creation, for better or worse. I'm Andy from What Culture Wrestling, and this is how Tony Khan's biggest mistake will change AEW forever. I'll start this one by referencing the perils of timely video production. AEW's current situation changes every hour. Reports are dropping like Premier League footballers under the force of a moderate breeze. And by the time you are watching this little video essay, new information may have come to light. So, full disclosure, I'm speaking about what we know now, as I sit here in What Culture Towers recording this audio in mid-April. And yes, you may have already guessed from the thumbnail, but this is another video about CM Punk. In September 2022, when Wade Keller reported that Tony Khan was possibly negotiating a buyout of CM Punk's AEW contract, it felt almost like closure. It wasn't an ideal solution. Punk's run was incredible at times, but after blowing up the universe after All Out 2022 in a situation that painted nobody in a positive light, it felt like AEW was at least moving on from CM Punk. The Elite returned to television, becoming the Trios division centerpieces they were always supposed to be. Then, when AEW's booking really kicked in after Revolution, the Elite's long-running saga with Hangman Page returned to the forefront in a war with the Blackpool Combat Club. Tony Khan was cooking once again. The Elite were cooking once again. And then, on the Wrestling Observer board, Dave Meltzer alleged that the still suspended Punk had refused to fulfill his role in the rushed saga with Jon Moxley over the summer, and the universe imploded. Punk buried Meltzer in response, and Chris Jericho as well, alleging that AEW had asked him to work while he was not medically cleared. A new cycle of dreaded discourse began anew, as fans examined every rumor and every bit of subtext. Once again, the backstage antics were more luridly fascinating than those happening on screen. For about 8 months now, AEW Dynamite has felt secondary to the unfilmed reality show. The quality of television at the moment is sadly immaterial. Until CM Punk leaves or returns, not a single storyline will matter as much as it could or should, because Phil Brooks is dominating everything while technically still suspended. But now, finally, the bollocks is coming to an end, in what threatens to be the least satisfying way imaginable. Let's take a quick second to summarize recent reports from Fightful, The Wrestling Observer, and Andrew Zarian. We know that Punk wants an AEW return. To facilitate this, AEW is considering splitting its roster. There'll be one group of wrestlers on Dynamite every Wednesday and another on a new show on Saturdays. CM Punk and Chris Jericho will supposedly lead that Saturday show, which may be called Collision and may debut in Chicago in mid-June. The roster split isn't going to be all that soft and will theoretically allow wrestlers who want to avoid certain situations to avoid certain situations. In doing this, AEW is drawing from the utopian mega feud of CM Punk versus the Elite and diluting it at the same time. And with Bryan Danielson effectively playing Punk's surrogate at the time of recording, Punk, according to Andrew Zarian, is likely to work a program with Chris Jericho, which, if we're being honest, just isn't the same. AEW fans know that tension exists between Jericho and Punk. Jericho is purported to have called Punk and I quote a cancer on the night of Brawl Out, and in his since deleted Instagram post, Punk referred to Jericho as a liar and a stooge. But with this feud, it is difficult to escape the idea that Jericho of all people doesn't need to be convinced to do this, or that Tony Khan has navigated an impossible situation for the benefit of the fans. It is a subplot masquerading as a selling point. The rumored Punk vs. Jericho program is AEW attempting to have its cake and eat it as well. It is a compromise that very few people asked for, including Punk himself. When Punk debuted in AEW and he and Tony Khan appeared at a press conference after The Last Dance that was very different to Brawl Out, Punk said that he wanted to work with Kenny Omega and the Young Bucks, Brian Pillman Jr., Ricky Starks, Powerhouse Hobbs, Jungle Boy, Jon Moxley, Darby Allin. He continued speaking of his desire to work with these talents across multiple outlets in multiple interviews, and in not one single solitary appearance was the name Chris Jericho ever brought up. This is plenty to assume that working with Jericho wasn't exactly high on Punk's list. Beyond this, a Kenny Omega, Jon Moxley, or Hangman Page working with Punk would surely get a better reaction if Punk does indeed come back. But if those feuds can't happen, it seems that Collision, a second 2-hour A show, is happening, and the implications of that aren't exactly ideal either. It isn't happening purely to accommodate Punk, but Punk by all accounts is being accommodated on it. For better or worse, in the two opposed extremes, CM Punk is uncompromising. That was and is the theme of his entire career, and yet the next chapter of that career threatens to dilute the entire thing. The idea that CM Punk can work grudge programs with wrestlers who aren't the elite Moxley or Page and conjuring up fake conviction that he actually despises other wrestlers at the moment is not believable. And removing Punk from the equation, Collision is still a huge risk. On one hand, the idea of a brand split isn't drastically removed from Khan's booking approach, which often sees him separate top talent to preserve future matches and programs already. Regardless, AEW already promotes a world and international title. A second Dynamite tier show might necessitate a second world title, and if it does, that idea is also bad. Another compromise, another dilution. The move to a brand split also risks even more locker room unrest. If the anger towards Punk isn't overstated, being told that you have to work Saturday nights with this man might not sit well with certain wrestlers. Tony Khan is already stretched pretty thin with Dynamite, Rampage, Ring of Honor, Dark, and Elevation. And with the quality of AEW generally dipping since summer 2021, adding 2 more hours of television could exacerbate that trend. AEW's pay-per-views work so well because they truly feel like premium events. But even if the current model remains in place, 5 hours of weekly TV poses a risk of content fatigue. Rampage is already cratered in viewership to that end, and Battle of the Belts, well, if we're being honest, that never really came to life. CM Punk is a wrestling genius, but he's flawed, has exploded many times already, and turns 45 years old later this year. On his best behavior, Punk just isn't someone to build around, even in the unlikely event that him and the locker room settle their differences. And I say that as someone who genuinely loves the guy's work. If Punk burns out, gets injured, or throws another Molotov cocktail over the promotion, AEW is left with 2 hours of primetime TV to fill without his presence. Suddenly, a combustible situation becomes a rather boring one. It's too hyperbolic to say that no good can come of this, of course. 2 more hours of weekly television does allow greener wrestlers to get more reps, and for AEW to finally get moving on underdeveloped characters like Konosuke Takeshita and maybe get people like Miro back on TV as well. And if Khan was to allow the Elite and Punk to each format their own 2-hour show around their respective visions of pro wrestling, that's probably an awesome product. But it's also a pipe dream. There are positives to AEW's imminent content farm era, but the days of an agonizing wait for Wednesday to come around every single week will slowly die. Tony Khan likes to take his time. Perhaps this split is in place to make it feel like a transgression when Punk or the Elite invade each other's shows in a future story. Perhaps Khan is hoping naively that this will happen organically over time. Perhaps he is burying his head in the sand. But say Punk and the Elite finally come to blows in a storyline and work a program over several months that is every bit as good as every AEW fan hopes. Then what? More content. That's what. More content, less meaning. AEW is already a very excessive promotion, so much so that great matches don't even really feel as special as they used to. If we get 2 more hours of it and oversaturation and fatigue do set in, great goes to good, good possibly even goes to average, and there's not really anywhere to go after that. Collision may well prove to be too ironic a name. No collision between the Elite and CM Punk, but rather an ugly collision between art and content, with content stealing one. I've been Andy, thank you for your time, and be sure to join the debate in the comment section below. Cheers.